Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I should have known from the wedding day. That moment her father pulled me aside like he had something important to share, like maybe he'd give me his blessing one more time or say something heartfelt now that I was officially his son-in-law. But no. Wallace Beecham looked me dead in the eye, his grip on my shoulder a little too tight, and said, "Make sure you give us a real Beecham this time. The fifth in line." Then he raised his glass and walked off, laughing with his brothers as if he'd just said the most charming thing ever. At the time, I didn't think too much of it. I figured it was some weird family joke, the kind older men tell after too many drinks. My name's Jared Whitlow. I'm 30 years old, a school counselor, and I'm married into a family that still believes bloodlines are more important than bedtime stories, dinner tables, and actual love. At the altar, I had only eyes for Mary Ann, smart, strong, stubborn, and funny in that quiet, sideways kind of way. I thought she was different from them. Maybe I still do. But the problem is, when your roots are tangled with poison, even the strongest branches bend under the weight. That moment with Wallace should have told me everything I needed to know. But I was young, in love, and focused on building a life. A real one. Not a lineage. A home. Not a dynasty. Mary Ann and I moved into a small house near my workplace, got a rescue dog named Lucky, and talked every night about what kind of parents we wanted to be. We weren't perfect, but we had plans. No throne to pass down. Just love to give. Then Ivy came into the world. She arrived during a storm that knocked the power out of half the city. I remember gripping Mary Ann's hand in the dim hospital room, her face pale but fearless, and then hearing that first cry. Ivy. All 8 pounds of her wrapped in wrinkled pink, with a mop of dark curls and a stare that felt like it had lived 1,000 lives already. I cried harder than she did. And Mary Ann. I'll never forget the way she looked at me, like we just made something holy. And we had. But Wallace didn't come. He sent a card. Through his wife, of course. A folded piece of paper with a baby rattle on the front and 5 words on the inside. Healthy is good. Next time, go for a win. I read it twice, then tossed it in the bin. Mary Ann didn't say much. She just picked up Ivy and kissed her forehead. That should have been the second clue. But still, I kept convincing myself, he's just old-fashioned. Maybe even harmless. Mary Ann said he'd warm up. But with people like Wallace, warmth is selective. He didn't want to know Ivy unless she came with a promise of passing on the Beecham name. Anything less wasn't enough. Still, life moved on. Ivy grew fast. She called me Dada before she could walk. She slept curled against my chest every Sunday afternoon while I read stories to her out loud, even though she couldn't understand a word yet. I loved her completely. And if Wallace couldn't see that, then it was his loss. Things seemed better for a while. Mary Ann even joked about a second baby once Ivy turned 2. I was nervous but excited. We started trying, and after 3 months, we saw those 2 faint pink lines. We were back in the hospital. I held her hand again. And I remember the way she clutched my fingers when the ultrasound tech said, "It's a girl." I swear, my heart swelled twice its size in that room. When we got home, we called her mother first. Then Mary Ann paused before dialing her dad. I told her we didn't have to. "No," she said. "He's still her grandfather. He needs to know." So she called. Put him on speaker. We both heard the silence after she told him. Then the long sigh. "Another girl," he muttered. "You're doing this on purpose." I laughed, thinking he was joking. Mary Ann didn't laugh. She ended the call quietly, and neither of us brought it up again that night. But from that moment on, I felt it. That slow, creeping weight. Like something had cracked beneath us, and we were pretending it hadn't. Over the next few weeks, Wallace stopped answering Mary Ann's messages. Her uncles canceled dinner invites. Ivy's birthday passed with no calls from the Beechams. It wasn't just neglect, it was protest. I tried not to let it get to me. We had bigger things to focus on. The baby, Ivy's potty training, bills. I worked extra hours at the school. Mary Ann started knitting again. And yet, in the background, I kept thinking about that wedding day. The toast. The smile. The pressure wrapped in fake charm. One day, at a family barbecue hosted by one of Mary Ann's cousins, Wallace cornered me by the grill. Just the 2 of us. "I hope this one's a boy," he said, sipping his drink. "Because we're starting to think maybe you don't have it in you." I stared at him. The smoke from the grill curled between us. I could hear Ivy laughing across the yard, chasing a butterfly, oblivious to the war her grandfather was trying to start. "I don't know what you mean," I replied, trying to stay calm. He leaned in a little closer. You know exactly what I mean. This family doesn't need more girls. We need men. And if you can't provide that, maybe Marianne needs someone who can. I turned away. I didn't trust myself to speak. That was the day I realized I wasn't just married to Marianne. I was in a quiet war with a legacy. And the worst part? She was stuck between both. That night, Marianne found me on the porch after Ivy had gone to bed. She sat beside me, hands on her belly. I'm sorry, she whispered. About him. I nodded, not knowing what to say. He wasn't always like this, she continued. Or maybe he was, and I didn't see it until now. I looked at her. Do you regret marrying me? She turned sharply. Never. You gave me Ivy. You gave me this baby. You gave me peace, even when everything else felt loud. And that was enough. For a while. Until it wasn't. Until the day the first blow came. And wasn't a joke anymore. Ivy was just shy of turning 3 when Marianne told me we were expecting again. She handed me a tiny onesie that read, Player 2 loading. And before I could even laugh, I felt the tears building. Parenthood changes you, but there's something about hearing it a second time. Like you've been given another chance to get it right. Not because you failed the first time, but because love multiplies. I picked her up off her feet and kissed her like we were 20 again. For a while, everything felt like it was glowing. Marianne started showing earlier this time, and Ivy loved talking to the baby through her belly like it was already her best friend. We bought little socks, filled the closet with soft blankets, and let Ivy pick out a stuffed giraffe for her new sibling. Marianne glowed. I made pancakes every Saturday. Life felt safe, solid. But that didn't last. Wallace was always a shadow in the background. Not loud, not visible, but always present in the silences. The way Marianne's phone would light up with a missed call from her mom instead of her dad. The awkwardness at family dinners. The sideways comments from her uncles. And the card. It was another card. From Wallace. No name, no note, just a single sentence printed in all caps. Still time to hope for a boy. That card came the same week as the 20-week ultrasound. The tech smiled as she turned the screen toward us. Congratulations, she said. It's another girl. I remember looking at Marianne. She smiled so softly. Her eyes had tears in them, but she wasn't crying from sadness. She was glowing from within. I reached for her hand and said, Perfect. And I meant it. We were driving back when her phone buzzed. Her mother. Marianne let it ring twice before answering. Hey, Mom. Yes. Mim. Yeah, we just found out. It's a girl. There was silence on the other end. Then Marianne's face dropped slightly. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she nodded to herself. Okay. That's all you wanted, right? She said. Fine. Bye. She hung up and stared out the window. What did she say? She said. Oh, just that. Then she said Wallace will be disappointed. I gripped the steering wheel harder. Why does it even matter to him? Because he thinks our daughters are erasing the Beecham name. Like they're wasted chances. I felt something burn in my chest. They're not chances, Marianne. They're people. They're our children. I know, she whispered. But to him, they're not enough. That week, things spiraled. Wallace stopped coming to family gatherings altogether. At a birthday brunch for Marianne's cousin, he left the moment we walked in. Didn't say a word. Just stood up and left his plate untouched. The tension was getting harder to ignore. Her uncle started making jokes, loud ones. You trying to start a daycare, Jared? One asked. Better start saving for weddings, said another. Girls will bleed you dry. I looked at Marianne, waiting for her to say something. She stayed quiet, eyes locked on her plate. That night, I told her I was done going to their events. I can't be a punching bag, not in front of Ivy. I understand, she said. But her voice was small, defeated. What I didn't expect was how fast the gossip spread. A week later, a co-worker, someone I barely spoke to, said, Heard you're in trouble at home, man. Can't make boys. I laughed it off, but something inside me cracked. It was like Wallace had set off a chain reaction, like his disapproval gave everyone else permission to disrespect the life we were building. And then came the final blow. We were at Marianne's mother's house for dinner. Just the 3 of us. Ivy was playing in the yard while we waited for her mom to finish cooking. I was clearing the dishes when Wallace walked in uninvited. No smile. No greeting. Just walked straight to the table and poured himself a drink like he owned the place. Marianne stiffened. You didn't tell me you'd be here, she said. He shrugged. Didn't know I needed permission to see my own family. You didn't come when Ivy was born. I had a headache. No, I said, unable to hold back. You had disappointment. He looked up at me like I'd just stepped out of line. Excuse me. You heard me. You've made it very clear what you think of my children. Your girls, he sneered, aren't Beecham's. They're side notes in a dying name. Marian gasped. Dad, stop. You stop, he barked. You've already disrespected this family with your choices. But this is insult. Another daughter? And you act like it's cause for celebration? Marian stood up. Her voice cracked. We are celebrating. She's healthy. She's ours. You're doing this on purpose, Wallace said, pointing at me. You're sabotaging our line. I should have known the day you walked into that church with your soft little voice and your clean hands. You weren't fit to carry this family. I stepped forward. Say what you want about me, but you don't get to talk about my daughters like that. He laughed bitterly. Your daughters? Are you even sure they're yours? That was it. I didn't swing. I didn't yell. I just turned and walked out of the house before I did something I'd regret. Marian followed, tears in her eyes, voice shaking. I'm sorry. I didn't know it was this bad. You shouldn't have to apologize for him, I said. But I'm not going to let our kids grow up thinking they're broken just because of their chromosomes. That night, Ivy crawled into our bed and placed her tiny hand on Marianne's belly. Hi, baby, she whispered. I can't wait to meet you. And just like that, everything made sense again. I was never trying to break the Beecham curse. I was trying to break the Beecham cycle. And that, I realized, would come with a cost. The first time I heard it, I thought I misheard. We were at a family barbecue, Wallace's side, of course. Out in the backyard of one of Marianne's uncles. Ivy was playing near the sprinkler with the other kids, and Marianne was helping carry out plates of grilled corn and chicken wings. I was by the cooler, grabbing 2 bottles of water, when I caught the end of a sentence from across the patio. Wallace's younger brother, Dean, leaned toward another man I didn't recognize and chuckled. Well, let's just say we're not even sure those girls are his. They both laughed like it was an inside joke, like I was supposed to be the punchline. I froze. Not out of shock, but because I didn't trust what I'd do if I moved. I held the bottles tighter until the condensation soaked through the napkins in my hand, then slowly turned around like I hadn't heard a thing. But I had. And once you hear something like that, you can't unhear it. That night, I told Marianne about it. Her shoulders tensed. She looked away. It's not the first time, she said, almost like she was ashamed. My Uncle Edgar asked me last week if we were sure Ivy wasn't from a donor. He said you didn't look like her. My throat tightened. You didn't tell me? Because I thought they'd stop. I didn't want to hurt you. Hurt me, I said, almost laughing. They're questioning my place in my own daughter's life. That's not hurt, that's war. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't punch walls. I just sat down on the edge of the bed and let it sink in. Ivy wasn't even 3 and already being pulled into a legacy she didn't ask for. One built on names, on lineage, on some warped sense of purity. And now, the whispers were becoming louder. A few days later, we were invited to Wallace's house for what he called a serious conversation. Marianne didn't want to go. I insisted. I wanted to hear it from him directly. We left Ivy with a neighbor and drove over in silence. His house, a 2-story brick colonial with ivy on the sides and a porch swing no one ever sat in, looked like something out of a brochure. But the warmth stopped at the paint. Inside, it always smelled like old cigars and polished wood and bitterness. He was sitting at the head of the table like a king holding court. Marianne's mother, Ellen, hovered near the kitchen, not making eye contact. Sit, Wallace said. No hello, no smile. Just a command. We sat. I could feel Marianne's hand shaking beside mine. Wallace folded his hands, stared at me like I was a report he was preparing to fail. I want a paternity test, he said, blunt as a hammer. Excuse me, I said, even though I heard him loud and clear. I want to know if Ivy is yours. And this new baby too. Before she's born. Marianne's breath hitched. Dad, what are you saying? You know exactly what I'm saying, he snapped. This whole family's been waiting for a son. You come along, and suddenly there's nothing but girls. Maybe the problem isn't just biology. Maybe it's trust. You think I cheated on Jared? She asked, stunned. You think I would do that? I don't know what to think, he said. But I know what I need to know. And if Jared's got nothing to hide, he won't be offended. You're not asking, I said. You're accusing. You're trying to validate your shame by tearing us apart. Wallace leaned back in his chair and smirked. You sound defensive. I'm protective, I corrected. There's a difference. Marianne stood up. We're leaving. Not before you agree, he said. You want to stay in this family, you take the test. That was the moment I knew. We weren't in a family. We were in a cult of legacy, and Wallace was the high priest. We drove home in silence again, only this time it was thick with rage. When we got inside, Mary Ann sat down on the floor and cried. Not because of what was said, but because deep down, a part of her still wanted his approval. And he knew that. He used it like a weapon. I knelt beside her, held her, and whispered, "We don't owe him anything. Not proof. Not blood. Not silence." She nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't ready to fight him. Not yet. A week later, another letter came in the mail. No return address. Inside, a sheet of paper with 6 typed words. "You're not man enough for sons." That was it. No signature. No explanation. But I knew where it came from. The way it was typed, courier font, always bold. Wallace's favorite. I didn't show Mary Ann. I burned it in the sink and said nothing. But inside me, something shifted. I'd spent years trying to be respectful, calm, understanding. I thought I could win them over with kindness. But you don't win over men like Wallace. You survive them. That Sunday, I took Ivy to the park, just the 2 of us. She ran around the swings, collecting pebbles and pretending they were diamonds. At one point, she stopped, ran back, and hugged my leg. "You're the best daddy in the world," she said. Just like that. No reason. No context. Just love. I looked at her and thought about that test Wallace wanted. The test that would tell me something I already knew, something that lived in her smile, in the way she scrunched her nose when she was curious, in the way she slept curled against my chest just like I used to sleep as a boy. Ivy was mine. No document needed. That night, I told Mary Ann I wouldn't take the test. Not for her father. Not for anyone. "We don't need proof," I said. "We have presence. We have history. We have bedtime stories and skinned knees and tickle fights and pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. He can keep his doubt. I'm keeping my family." Mary Ann nodded, her eyes red but proud. We both knew then. We were done bending. But Wallace wasn't done pushing. And the next push would be a shove we never saw coming. It started with silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that lingers too long on the other end of the phone. The kind that speaks louder than any insult. After I refused the paternity test, Wallace stopped speaking to Mary Ann completely. He didn't call. Didn't text. Even his wife, Ellen, who used to send short, clipped updates like, "Hope Ivy's feeling better," or "Tell Mary Ann I miss her," went quiet. That silence crawled into our home like smoke. Mary Ann walked around distracted most days, folding and unfolding laundry that didn't need folding, baking loaves of banana bread no one asked for. She didn't cry, not outright. But I knew her. The way her voice dropped a few octaves when she was fighting tears. The way she tapped her nails against her coffee cup when she was trying not to explode. And the way she'd look at her phone like she was waiting for it to buzz with an apology that would never come. Ivy sensed it too. Kids always do. She stopped asking about Grandpa Wallace. Stopped bringing up the toy train he gave her that first Christmas. It was like even she understood that some names were better left out of bedtime prayers. But Mary Ann, she still held on to hope. One morning, around her 7th month of pregnancy, she sat next to me on the porch with her tea and said, "I think he just needs to feel heard." I nearly choked on my coffee. "He called our daughters a disgrace." "I know," she whispered. "But he's my dad, Jared. And I'm your husband. And you matter to me. But he's all I knew growing up. When he's not like this, he can be kind. He taught me how to change a tire, remember? Kindness isn't supposed to come with terms," I said. Still, I could see the battle in her. She didn't want to choose. She wanted peace. And part of me still wanted that too. So when she asked if I'd be willing to visit him one last time before the baby came, I hesitated, but I said yes. Not because I expected anything to change, but because I wanted her to know I tried. That I wasn't the one closing the door. That I wasn't the one pushing anyone away. We left Ivy with Mary Ann's sister, Clara, and drove the 2 hours in silence. The same silence that had followed us for weeks now, thick, exhausted, layered with everything we weren't saying. As we pulled into the Beecham family estate, I felt the weight settle on my shoulders like a coat I hadn't worn in years but still remembered the itch. The porch lights were on even though it was still afternoon. That house didn't welcome people, it displayed them. When Wallace opened the door, he looked at me like I was a stray dog someone had let onto his lawn. He didn't say hello, just turned and walked back inside like we were meant to follow. Ellen offered a weak smile from the kitchen but stayed out of sight. The dining table was already set. 3 plates. A centerpiece of white lilies. The kind of setup you'd expect for Easter Sunday, not a family intervention. We sat. Wallace took the head of the table, naturally, and poured himself a glass of something dark. "Thank you for coming," he said, but not to me, only to Marianne. I counted to 5 in my head before answering anything. Marianne cleared her throat. "We didn't come to fight. We just wanted to see if there's any room to fix this." Wallace sipped his drink. "That depends." "On what?" I asked, voice calm. "On whether you're willing to be a man about this," he said, eyes on me like we were the only ones in the room. I smiled thinly. "Define man." "A man builds a name. A man ensures his line continues. A man doesn't hide behind women." I leaned forward. "And a man doesn't throw away his family because he didn't get the gender he wanted." Marianne reached for my hand under the table. Her grip was tight. Wallace waved a hand. "Let's just eat." Dinner started with silence. Forks clinking. Knives cutting. Wallace didn't ask a single question about Ivy. Not one. He didn't ask how the pregnancy was going, whether Marianne was sleeping well, what her cravings were, if the baby had a name. Nothing. Just ate, drank, and stared through us. 10 minutes in, he raised his glass. "A toast," he said. "To my unborn grandson." My heart dropped. Marianne blinked slowly. "It's a girl, Dad." The glass paused in midair. Then he smiled. A cold, brittle smile. "No, it isn't." "Yes," she said. "It is." The glass shattered on the floor. I jolted. Marianne jumped. Ellen came running in, gasping at the sound. Wallace stood up, red-faced, fists clenched. "You did this deliberately. You're trying to end the Beecham name." "No," Marianne said, voice cracking. "We're having a baby. That's all. That's what matters." "You think I waited my whole life for this?" he roared. "You think I built this legacy for it to die with 2 little girls who can't even carry it forward?" I stood up. Calmly. Slowly. "That's enough." "No," he said, pointing at me, his voice shaking. "You're enough. You're the reason this family is dying." "That's not how it works," I replied. "Blood doesn't make family. Love does. And right now, my daughters have more love in their fingernails than you've got in your entire body." He lunged. For a second, I thought he was going to stop, that his age or pride would slow him. But he didn't. He came at me, fast for someone his size. He grabbed the front of my shirt and shoved me into the doorway behind us. My back hit the frame with a sharp thud. My head spun. I didn't hit him back. I didn't even raise my fists. Ellen screamed. Marianne yelled for him to stop. And then came the fist. Right to my jaw. A punch, closed and deliberate. It wasn't hard enough to knock me out. Just hard enough to say, "I still have power over you." I pushed him off me, not with violence, but with force. I held him by the shoulders and looked him in the eye. "You just made your choice," I said. Then I walked out the front door, holding my jaw, breath shallow. Marianne followed, shaking. I didn't speak. She didn't either. But the silence between us that night wasn't heavy. It was a silence of decision. The visit was over. So was the illusion of family. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a little. My jaw throbbed with every heartbeat. But it wasn't just the pain from Wallace's punch that kept me awake. It was the way he looked at me, like I was less than a man, like I had failed at something he believed defined me. Marianne lay beside me, turned on her side, eyes wide open but not blinking. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? There wasn't a word in any language that could undo what had just happened in that house. I got out of bed around 4 in the morning and stood by the kitchen sink, drinking cold water in silence. The moonlight crept in through the blinds, stretching across the floor like it was trying to touch the parts of the house we weren't ready to. My phone buzzed on the counter. I flinched, startled. It was a message from Clara, Marianne's sister. "Is it true? Did he really hit you?" I didn't respond. Another message came 5 minutes later. "I'm so sorry. This family is a mess. Do you want me to keep Ivy longer?" That one I answered. "Yes, please. Just a little longer." I wasn't ready for Ivy to see me like this. I knew she wouldn't notice the swelling on my face. Kids never look at you the same way adults do, but I couldn't pretend. Not yet. I had to process what had happened. That her grandfather had physically attacked me because I wasn't giving him the grandchild he wanted. Because our second daughter somehow wasn't good enough. By mid-morning, I called the non-emergency police line. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew that if I didn't draw a line now, there would be no line left to draw later. A man who would punch his daughter's husband over the gender of a baby would do worse if left unchecked. The officer took my report calmly, even sympathetically. He asked if I had any witnesses. I gave him Ellen's name. I gave him Mary Ann's. I didn't embellish. I didn't lie. I just told them exactly what happened. When I hung up, Mary Ann was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, holding her belly with both hands like she was guarding the baby from the world. Her eyes were puffy. She looked at me like she was waiting for a verdict. I filed the report, I said. She nodded. Good. That word, just that one word, held so much. Approval. Relief. A small apology. Later that day, 2 officers visited Wallace at his home. He wasn't arrested, not immediately, but he was formally warned and flagged in their system. I expected denial. What I didn't expect was what came next. Wallace claimed I had attacked him. He told the officers that I had come into his house drunk and disrespectful, and that I lunged first. I read the report myself. Mary Ann showed me after Ellen told her what he was trying to pull. My blood turned ice. He wasn't just trying to avoid responsibility, he was flipping the whole story, painting me as the threat, the danger, the unstable one. But what he didn't count on was Mary Ann standing up. The next morning, she walked into the station with a typed statement, photographs of the bruises forming on my jaw and shoulder, and her voice steady as a stone. My father has been emotionally abusive for years, she said. But last night, he crossed a line. He assaulted my husband in front of me. I saw it. My mother saw it. And if nothing is done, he will do it again. It was the first time I had seen her speak out against him like that. Not with hesitation. Not with excuses. Just truth. I stood outside the glass doors, watching her through the reflection. She looked smaller than I remembered, but braver too. When she came out, she held my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the same side again. It took another day for the charges to be filed formally. Wallace was brought in for questioning. I received a notice for a protective order hearing. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. There was no pride in watching an old man unravel. But there was clarity. A stillness that comes when you finally realize protecting your family sometimes means standing against the one you married into. The hardest part came later that week when Ivy came home. She ran into my arms like nothing had happened, giggling, holding up a drawing she made of Mommy, Daddy, and the baby. I lifted her up carefully, trying not to wince when her arm brushed the bruise still blooming on my side. Mary Ann was quiet for most of the day. At dinner, Ivy asked the question we both knew was coming. Why doesn't Grandpa Wallace visit me anymore? I put my fork down slowly. Mary Ann looked at me, and I could see her battling with how to answer. I took a deep breath and leaned toward Ivy. Sometimes, people we love make choices that aren't safe, I said. And when they do, we have to make sure our home stays peaceful. That's our job. Did he do something bad? She asked. Mary Ann nodded softly. He did something that made Daddy very sad. Ivy frowned. Can I still draw him pictures? Mary Ann smiled gently. You can draw anything you want, sweet pea. But for now, let's keep them in your special box, okay? Ivy nodded, satisfied, and returned to her mashed potatoes. That night, after she fell asleep, Mary Ann and I sat on the porch. The stars were out. The wind carried a slight chill, but it felt refreshing, like the air after a storm. She turned to me and asked, Do you think I'm a bad daughter? I shook my head. I think you're a good mother. Her lip quivered. I didn't want this. I just wanted him to be proud. He can't be proud of something he doesn't understand, I said. And he doesn't understand love that doesn't look like him. She nodded and leaned against my shoulder. For the first time in a long time, I felt something real settling in between us again. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Wallace anymore. It was about what kind of world we wanted to build for our daughters. And that world wouldn't be built on the bones of his expectations. It would be built on truth, on safety, and on the kind of love that doesn't demand conditions to exist. The hospital lights hummed low in the background as I sat in the waiting area, thumb rubbing slow circles on my knee. Mary Ann was inside for one of her final checkups before the baby's arrival. Her belly had grown heavy with life, and yet her steps remained light. Too light for someone carrying everything she was carrying. Not just a child, but the weight of betrayal, disappointment, broken loyalty. The last few weeks had passed in a fog of appointments, paperwork, and conversations that felt more like testimonies. The day after Wallace punched me, things moved fast. Too fast to process. First the bruises, then the officers, then the report. I had filed it because it felt necessary, not out of vengeance. I didn't want to become one of those stories you hear about, the ones where people ignore red flags until someone ends up truly hurt. And I wasn't going to wait for Wallace to make Ivy the next target of his bitterness. The thing about pressing charges is people assume you feel better afterward. Like the legal act of calling someone out for hurting you somehow unhurts you. But it doesn't. Not at first. If anything, it breaks you open further. You go through every moment again, repeating it to officers, to Mary Ann, to the judge. You feel like a broken record, stuck on the worst track of your life. And even though everyone tells you you're doing the right thing, a small part of you wonders if doing the right thing should feel this heavy. The court date was set a week after the incident. Wallace, through his attorney, denied everything. According to him, I had escalated a civil disagreement and lunged in a threatening manner, forcing him to defend himself. I stared at those words on the paper like they were written in some alternate universe. A version of me I didn't recognize. A man he was trying to paint with shadows. But he had underestimated someone actually. Mary Ann. The day we walked into the courtroom, Mary Ann held my hand so tightly my fingers turned pale. She didn't let go when her father glanced our way. She didn't shrink back when his lawyer tried to smile politely, as though this was just another petty family squabble. She stood by me, visibly pregnant, visibly exhausted, and visibly done being quiet. We sat before the judge. Wallace's side went first. His attorney spun a version of the story so detached from reality, I nearly laughed, until I realized just how practiced he was. Cold, clinical, deliberate. Then it was our turn. I spoke calmly. I told the court exactly what happened, what was said, how it escalated. I kept my tone measured. I didn't need to act like the victim. I just needed to be honest. The truth could stand on its own. Then Mary Ann took the stand. And everything changed. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She looked the judge in the eye and said, "I have spent my life watching my father control people with his disappointment. He's used silence as punishment, shame as leverage, and tradition as a weapon. But this time, he crossed a line. He assaulted my husband over the gender of our unborn daughter. And I can't let that kind of man near my children anymore." The courtroom was quiet after that. No rebuttal. No cross-examination. Wallace sat stiff in his chair, eyes like cold marbles, jaw tight. He didn't speak. I almost wanted him to. Maybe then we could have seen a glimpse of something human in him. But no. He stayed frozen, like if he moved, the whole mask would crack and fall apart. The judge granted a protective order, temporary, for now, pending full review. Wallace wasn't allowed near our home, our daughter, or Mary Ann until further notice. The officer handed us the document before we even left the courthouse. Mary Ann read it twice, folded it neatly, and tucked it into her purse like a shield. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Later that night, as I sat on the couch watching Ivy sleep on the baby monitor, Mary Ann came in holding her phone. She looked drained. "It's my mom," she said. "She wants to meet." I sighed. "Alone?" She didn't say. "Do you want to go?" She paused. "I don't know." Ellen had stayed out of everything. Too quiet. Too neutral. She hadn't called since the hearing. I knew she loved Mary Ann in her own way, but she also loved the illusion of peace, keeping the family intact, even if it meant taping over the cracks instead of fixing them. Mary Ann ended up meeting her the next afternoon at a cafe in town. I waited in the car. She came back 20 minutes later, eyes red, but not from tears. From release. She said she's sorry, Mary Ann said. She said she didn't know it would go this far. But she knew who he was, I replied. Mary Ann nodded. She said she was scared of him too. That hit me harder than I expected. It reminded me this wasn't just about me. Wallace's shadow didn't start with us. It had been hanging over that family for decades. Later that week, Ivy's daycare asked us to update our emergency contact forms. Mary Ann removed Wallace's name from the list. I watched her do it. She didn't hesitate. Just scratched it out and wrote her sister's name instead. That moment, small as it seemed, was monumental. It was the first time I saw her actively rewrite what family meant. Around the same time, we decided to repaint the nursery. We hadn't touched it since finding out the gender. The walls were a soft green, but something about it reminded us too much of the old house, of Wallace's expectations, of everything we didn't want to bring into our daughter's life. Mary Ann chose lavender. Not too pink, not too loud, she said. Just calm. While I painted, Ivy sat in the corner stacking blocks. She hummed to herself, and every now and then said something to the baby through Mary Ann's stomach. You're gonna like it here, she whispered once. We got pancakes and puzzles and Daddy makes silly songs. I had to stop painting for a minute. Not because of exhaustion, but because my heart was full to the point of spilling. We were building something different. Not a legacy. A home. No thrones. No pressure. Just love. And I realized then, as the paint dried and Ivy laughed at her own jokes, that we weren't running from Wallace anymore. We were building past him. Brick by brick. Word by word. Wall by wall. And this time, the foundation would be soft. But strong. The court gave us space, and with space came the quiet. Not peace. Peace is earned, but quiet. Enough to think, to breathe, to process everything that had come crashing down in the span of a few months. We were waiting now. For the baby. For final hearings. For a future we were slowly trying to stitch back together. But even in the silence, Wallace lingered like a shadow. His name wasn't said, but it was there, in the pause before Marian answered her phone, in the way her mother signed text with just "eat" instead of "mom," and in the way Ivy stopped asking about him altogether. Like she had absorbed the unspoken rule. Don't mention the man who made mom cry and dad flinch. One morning, about 2 weeks before Marianne's due date, she turned to me at breakfast and said, "I think we should take the test." I blinked at her, confused. What test? She placed her spoon down and looked at me like it hurt to say the next part. The paternity test. For Ivy. And for the baby. Just to shut it down. All of it. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Of all the things we'd been through, this was one I thought we had buried. You don't have to prove anything to that man, I said finally. It's not for him, she replied. It's for the record. For the court. For every uncle, every cousin, every whisper that thinks we were scared of the truth. I studied her face. She wasn't doing it out of doubt. She was doing it to close a door. I understood that. Closure is rarely for the guilty, it's for the ones left bleeding in the aftermath. So we did it. We drove to a clinic 2 towns over. Quiet place, no questions. Ivy sat on my lap while the nurse swabbed the inside of her cheek. She giggled and said it tickled. I kissed her forehead. I didn't feel fear. I knew who she was, every smile, every habit, every story we'd written together in bedtime songs and grocery store adventures. I knew who she was because I had raised her heartbeat with mine since the day she was born. Biology was just ink on paper. Love was what counted. Still, when the results came in a week later, sealed in a plain envelope, my hands trembled. Not from doubt. From anger. That we had to go this far just to satisfy a lie someone else invented. Marian opened it. Her eyes scanned the lines quickly, then again, slower. She handed it to me with a quiet here. I read it once. Then twice. Then I smiled. Not because I needed validation, but because it was over. 99.998% probability. I want to mail it to him, she said, walking to the kitchen drawer and pulling out a blank envelope. And not just him. His brothers. His cousins. Everyone who snickered and whispered and judged. I stood beside her. Let's add a photo of Ivy. The one where she's wearing your old college hoodie. Marian smiled. And we'll write something on the back. Like what? I asked. She paused, thought for a moment, then scribbled in careful handwriting. The last piece of proof you'll ever get. Goodbye. She sealed the envelopes herself, licked the glue, pressed them shut with calm hands. There was no rage. Just clarity. A quiet, decisive end. We dropped them at the post office together. Ivy danced on the sidewalk, holding a purple balloon from the bakery next door, oblivious to the fact that her face was about to confront a whole family's shame. I held her hand tightly. She tugged at mine and said, "Can we get cupcakes?" 2, I said. 1 for each daughter. We didn't hear back. Not a single reply. No calls. No messages. No drive-by apologies. Just silence. And that, to me, was louder than anything they could have said. Silence meant they saw the truth and had no defense. Silence meant we won. A few days later, Marian went into labor. It happened at 3 a.m. sharp, jarring contractions that had her gripping my hand. We rushed to the hospital, Ivy still half asleep in her cousin's arms as we dropped her off. The birth was hard. Not dangerous, but harder than the first. Marian pushed for longer. Cried more. I held her hair back, kissed her forehead, whispered that she was strong, that she could do this. And she did. Hours later, our second daughter was born. They placed her in Marianne's arms, and she looked at me with the faintest smile and said, "She's perfect." Just like Ivy. I kissed her cheek and stared at our newborn's wrinkled face, the way her tiny hand curled instinctively around my finger. I didn't care who she looked like. I didn't care what her name meant in some lineage I never signed up for. She was ours. She was here, and she was loved. We named her Rowan. No one from Wallace's side showed up at the hospital. Not Ellen. Not the uncles. Not even a hollow congratulations message. It was as if we had quietly disappeared from their version of the family tree. And you know what? We didn't miss them. We filled the room with friends, with laughter, with chocolate muffins and flowers and cards from the parents at Ivy's daycare. My sister came in from out of state and brought Ivy a big sister crown. She wore it for 2 days straight. When we got home, the nursery was ready. Lavender walls. The soft glow of a nightlight. Ivy insisted on helping with every diaper change. Rowan would cry and Ivy would pat her gently and say, "It's okay. I'm here now." And in those little moments, in those quiet acts of sisterhood and safety, I realized we had finally broken free. One night, as I rocked Rowan to sleep and Ivy read a picture book out loud to herself, Marian came up behind me, wrapped her arms around my waist, and whispered, "Thank you for fighting." I looked at her and said, "Thank you for standing beside me." We didn't need Wallace's name. We had our own. A name built on choice, not pressure. On presence, not pedigree. And as I watched Rowan close her eyes for the first time in our home, I knew this was the moment the story changed. The past could stay in envelopes and courtrooms. The future was wrapped in a soft baby blanket, snoring softly on my chest. The thing about silence is it's not always a punishment. Sometimes it's a gift. And after everything that had happened, silence was exactly what we needed. No more phone calls. No more awkward family invitations. No more sideways comments or backhanded blessings. Just us. The four of us. Ivy, Rowan, Marianne, and me. A new kind of quiet filled our home now. Not the kind that trembles with tension, but the soft quiet that follows a storm. The kind that makes you grateful to still be standing. Ivy adjusted to being a big sister faster than I expected. She'd wake up earlier just to peek into Rowan's crib, press a finger gently to her tiny palm, and whisper, "I'm watching you, baby. Don't worry." It melted me every time. I found myself staring at them both, often more than I should, like I needed to soak it all in, to memorize every blink, every breath, every detail that proved love had bloomed here, despite the poison that once tried to grow among us. We stopped answering unknown numbers. Marian removed every remaining Beecham from her social media. Not out of hatred, just necessity. We were done letting them linger at the edge of our lives like wolves pacing outside the fence. The court order was still active, and Wallace hadn't tried to breach it. I knew it aided him, not being in control, not being able to show up and rattle the walls of our peace. And yet, his absence was the best gift he could have ever given our daughters. One morning, Ivy sat at the table, drawing with crayons while I made breakfast. She looked up at me and asked, "Can people forget how to love?" I froze for a moment, then turned the burner down and knelt beside her. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged, still coloring. "Because Grandpa Wallace doesn't love us, right?" My heart cracked quietly. I glanced at Marianne across the room, who had also heard, and she looked up slowly from her tea. Ivy wasn't upset. She wasn't even asking with sadness. It was curiosity, pure and gentle. And in that moment, I knew my answer mattered. Sometimes, I said carefully, people forget what love is supposed to feel like. They confuse it with other things, like rules, or pride, or power. She nodded like that made sense. But, I added, you can't let someone else's forgetting stop you from remembering. Love is still real, even if they can't show it. Ivy smiled and went back to her drawing. I made him look like a troll anyway. I couldn't help but laugh. Marianne did too. Ivy's picture showed a crooked old man with angry eyebrows standing in front of a castle that had no door. "That's so he can't come in," she explained, giggling. The castle, in my mind, was our home. And the missing door? It wasn't missing at all. We had taken it down ourselves, brick by brick, and built a wall. We redecorated the nursery a little more. I put up shelves shaped like clouds, and Marianne painted constellations above Rowan's crib. At night, Ivy would lie on the floor with me and name the shapes. "That's a unicorn. That's Mommy holding baby Rowie. And that's Daddy turning into a dragon to fight a mean king." I'd grin and ask, "What happens to the mean king?" "He disappears," she'd say without hesitation. "Because dragons are stronger." I'd nod. "You're right. Dragons protect their treasure. Our daughters were our treasure." That spring, Marian suggested we start new traditions. She didn't say it out loud, but I knew why. We were replacing the old ones. The Sunday dinners we used to suffer through. The Beecham reunions we no longer attended. The birthdays that used to feel like obligations. So we started small. Ivy Day. 1 day a month, just for her. She got to pick everything. Breakfast, outfit, movie, park. She named it herself. Ivy Day is the best day in the world, she declared as she ate marshmallows on pancakes and wore pajamas outside. We did the same when Rowan turned 6 months. Roey's Rules, Ivy called it. On Roey's Rules Day, we all have to do baby stuff. So we had milk-only snacks, played peekaboo tournaments, and gave prizes to whoever could make Rowan laugh the most. Those traditions became our armor. They filled the cracks. They reminded us that love didn't need to be inherited. It could be planted and grown, completely fresh, completely our own. But not everything was easy. One evening, Marianne's phone lit up with a call from her mother. She stared at it for a long time before letting it go to voicemail. She left a message, Marianne said. Do you want to hear it? I hesitated. Only if you want to. We sat together on the couch, the girls asleep in their rooms. Marianne pressed play. Hi, sweetheart. It's Mom. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know I was quiet. I know I didn't protect you the way I should have. I guess I spent too many years trying to keep things calm and forgot how to keep things right. Wallace hasn't changed. He never will. But I see now that you have. You become someone stronger than I ever dared to be. And I want to be part of your world again. If you'll let me. She ended with a shaky breath. Marianne stared at the screen for a long time before saying anything. I believe her, she whispered. But I don't know if I can trust her. You don't have to decide right now, I said. But she's reaching out. That's something. Marianne nodded slowly. Maybe. But the girls come first. Always. And that was it. We didn't call back, not yet. But we didn't block her either. Instead, we focused on what we could control. Ivy's school application. Rowan's first attempts at crawling. The garden Marianne started planting in the backyard. A garden full of lavender, sunflowers, and little wooden signs Ivy decorated with phrases like "Magic lives here" and "No trolls allowed." And every night, as I tucked Ivy into bed, she'd wrap her arms around my neck and say, "You're a good dragon, Daddy." And I'd say, "And you're my favorite treasure." It didn't matter what Wallace thought anymore. His absence wasn't a hole, it was space we filled with joy. A house without a man like him wasn't a house lacking. It was a house that finally felt like home. 2 years passed like a breath drawn in slowly and finally exhaled. Ivy turned 5 and started kindergarten with a backpack nearly her size and a confidence that felt older than her years. Rowan, who had entered our lives with the quiet cry of a newborn barely over 6 pounds, now walked around the house in squeaky socks, calling everything hers, including my socks, the dog's bed, and the last cookie in the jar. We were doing it parenting, healing, moving on. Day by day, week by week, we had quietly rebuilt our world. And then, just when I thought nothing could surprise me anymore, life did what life does. It flipped the script again. Her name was Nina. We met at Ivy's school orientation. She was the single mother of a boy named Luca, who had Ivy's same loud laugh and Rowan's wide, watchful eyes. Nina had warm eyes and a tired smile, the kind you earn after long nights and long years. We got to talking while our kids tried to eat chalk and climb monkey bars that were far too high. What began as small talk, "How many kids do you have? What do you do for work? Wow, they grow fast, huh?" turned into longer conversations. Pickups turned into occasional coffees. Coffees turned into afternoons at the park. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just something honest, easy, undemanding. I never looked for love again after Marianne. I didn't think I needed it. But I also didn't realize how starved I was for simple understanding until Nina looked at me one day and said, "You carry everyone, don't you?" I laughed. "Not always." "You don't have to," she said. "But I get it. I do it too." She got it. All of it. The loneliness that comes after survival. The way your heart aches for peace so badly, it forgets how to trust calmness when it finally arrives. The first time I introduced her to Ivy and Rowan officially, Ivy asked, "Is she your friend? Or just a coffee friend?" Nina knelt beside her and said, "I'm whoever your daddy needs me to be. And whoever you want me to be, too." It was one of those answers that meant everything without saying much at all. We kept things gentle. Marianne knew about her before the girls did. I told her out of respect, not permission. We had grown into a place of understanding. We weren't a couple anymore, but we were still a family. She looked at me across the table, her wedding band long gone, and said, "If she's kind to her girls, that's all I need." I nodded. She is. She really is. Time marched forward. We celebrated Ivy's 6th birthday in the backyard with balloons shaped like unicorns and a cake that read Queen of Everything. Marian came. So did Nina. They spoke, even laughed. Ivy ran between them both like a bridge that had no cracks. It was strange how healing sometimes looked like two women who had never meant to know each other, now joined to the same two girls they both loved. One evening, as we tucked the girls into bed and Rowan insisted on sleeping with 2 stuffed rabbits and a sock puppet named Gerald, Nina turned to me and said, "I'm late." I blinked. "For what?" "Not for anything," she said, her hand resting on her stomach. "I'm late." It took me a second. Then 2. Then everything inside me slowed down. "You mean?" She nodded, almost nervously. "I took a test this morning." I didn't know what to say. I sat down slowly, watching Rowan mumble in her sleep, her little arm draped across her sister's back like a tiny protector. Then I turned to Nina. She looked scared, but not of me, of the unknown. "We're having a baby?" I whispered. "If you want it," she said softly. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the emotion had nowhere else to go. It spilled out as a sound I hadn't made in a long time. I pulled her close and said, "Yes, we're having a baby." And that's when it hit me. This baby would be my 3rd child. My first boy. I didn't cry because it was a boy. I cried because I realized something. I had never needed a boy to feel complete. I had never been missing anything. Ivy and Rowan had filled every inch of me with joy, chaos, grace, purpose. But Wallace had convinced everyone, convinced me at one point, that manhood hinged on something as shallow as a child's gender. Holding Nina's hand, the news still fresh between us, I realized I hadn't thought about Wallace in months. Not really. Not until that moment. But now, with this unexpected life growing, I felt the past knocking again. Not as a threat, but as a mirror. When the official ultrasound came and we saw the image, tiny hands, tiny feet, a heartbeat strong enough to be heard through the whole room, I cried again. And Ivy asked, "Is it another sister?" "No." I smiled. "It's a baby brother." She gasped. "Can I name him Sparklebot?" "No." I laughed. "But good try." We didn't tell Wallace. But I sent him a letter. A plain white envelope, no return address. Inside it, a single sheet of paper, typed in the same bold font he used to prefer. I didn't sign it. I didn't explain anything. It simply read, "I had a son, but he won't bear your name." We didn't need the Beecham name anymore. We never had. Our names were made of bedtime songs, spilled juice, school drawings, broken crayons, and tiny hands that reached out even in sleep. Our names were made of apologies whispered in the dark and forgiveness that didn't need paperwork. Our names were made at kitchen tables, on porch swings, in whispered conversations between co-parents who chose peace over pettiness. When Nina gave birth, I held her hand the same way I had held Marianne's years before. Different story. Same awe. When I first held him, I whispered, "You don't need to prove anything to anyone." Ivy insisted he looked like a potato. Rowan called him Baby Dragon. Nina and I named him Asher. Wallace never replied. But the silence? This time, it didn't sting. This time, it felt like closure. I used to believe legacy was something written in stone, that it lived in names and bloodlines and faded photographs passed down in thick albums. Wallace believed that too, or at least, he clung to it so tightly that he suffocated anything that didn't look like his definition of worth. But I've learned that legacy isn't a name. It's not a lineage. It's not a last initial carved into a mailbox or embroidered on a family crest. It's the sound of my daughter's laughter echoing down the hall. It's the feel of my son's breath on my shoulder as he falls asleep mid-sentence. It's a quiet home, a gentle partner, a second chance done right. That's my legacy. And I built it without him. Marianne and I were good now. Not perfect, not nostalgic, but good. We co-parent like a team that knows each other's plays by heart. We pass the girls between our homes with hugs and updates and notes tucked in their backpacks. She married again last year. A man named Cole, soft-spoken, warm, present. Ivy calls him my other grown-up. I never imagined being okay with someone else tucking in my daughters at night. But when I saw Ivy climb into his lap with a book and lean against him like she'd been doing it her whole life, I didn't feel threatened. I felt grateful. Marianne and I had coffee the day after her wedding. Just us. No kids. No pressure. "Are you happy?" I asked. She smiled, stirring her cup slowly. "I am." "You deserve that," I told her. "So do you," she replied. "You always did, even when I couldn't see it." There was a time I might have needed those words like air. But now? They were just icing on a cake I'd already learned to bake myself. We'd both grown in different directions, and that was okay. Some trees don't grow side by side. They grow apart, casting shade over different roots. Asher's almost one now. He's a quiet baby, unless Ivy is around, then he lights up like a festival. Rowan, on the other hand, is convinced he's her personal assistant. She follows him around with a clipboard, assigning him chores like smiling or blinking or clapping twice. He's too young to understand, but he plays along, charmed by her intensity. Nina and I aren't married yet, but we're steady. We've built something slow and real. No pressure. Just love layered gently over time. She doesn't try to erase my past, and I don't try to rush her future. We meet in the middle, where the kids are laughing, and the dishes are only half done, and somehow it all works. Sometimes I still get letters from Ellen, Marianne's mom. Not often. Once every few months. A folded card with updates about her garden, or a small photo of Ivy at a recital if Marianne forgets to send one. We've never discussed Wallace. Not directly. But in one letter, she wrote, "I look at Ivy and Rowan and see what could have been. Thank you for protecting them, even when we didn't know how." I never replied. I didn't need to. Wallace, as far as I know, lives alone now. His health has declined. One of Marianne's cousins mentioned in passing that he fell down the stairs last winter and broke 2 ribs. He refused help. Refused the hospital. Still too proud to let anyone see him vulnerable. Still trying to wear the mask of a man no one's asking to be anymore. He hasn't tried to contact us. Not once. No letters. No calls. No knocks at the door. And that's fine. I stopped waiting for apologies from people who don't believe they did anything wrong. The closure didn't come from his voice, it came from the silence. From knowing that my kids would grow up without his expectations shaping their self-worth. Without his voice questioning their value. We visit Marianne's side of the family sometimes. Not the whole clan. Just Clara and her kids. The ones who stayed neutral. The ones who reached out after the dust settled and said, "We didn't know what to say, but we never stopped loving the girls." Ivy still remembers the birthday party where Wallace called her a wasted chance. She doesn't talk about it, but sometimes when she draws families, she leaves one man off the page. I don't correct her. Rowan asked me once, "Is Grandpa Wallace still mad we're girls?" I knelt beside her, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Maybe, but that doesn't matter." Why not? Because being a girl is magic, and he just never learned how to see it. She nodded and went back to building a castle out of couch cushions. That was enough. Asher will never know Wallace. He'll never meet the man who defined masculinity as something small and angry. Instead, he'll grow up learning that strength is in kindness. That protection comes without punishment. That real men cry, clean, apologize, and listen. I look at my kids and I don't see legacy. I see light. And I made peace with that. A few weeks ago, Ivy had a family day event at school. Each kid had to stand up and share something about where they came from. She wore a shirt that said future president of everything and carried a folder full of drawings and cutouts. I sat in the back with Nina and Asher while Rowan sat crisscrossed beside her classmates. When it was Ivy's turn, she stood up, smiled wide, and said, "My family is weird and wonderful. My mom says I'm a sunflower. My dad says I'm a star. My sister thinks I'm the boss. My baby brother can't talk yet, but I think he agrees. We don't all live in the same house, but we love like we do. And that's my favorite part." I don't remember much after that because I was wiping tears off my face with a sleeve that had crayon smudges on it. Legacy isn't passed down. It's lived out. It's not written in family trees. It's drawn in sidewalk chalk, sung in lullabies, baked into burnt pancakes, and tucked into bedtime story.